There's a moment, somewhere between longing and power, where love begins to twist into something else, something darker, something Nietzsche understood long before anyone dared to say it aloud. He believed that beneath the poetry of romance, beneath the vows and the tenderness and the illusion of equality, there lies an ancient struggle, a battle not of hearts but of wills. To Nietzsche, love was never merely about union, it was about conquest. A man seeks in love not peace but victory. A woman, he said, does not surrender out of weakness, but as a deeper form of mastery. It's a dance where domination hides behind devotion, and devotion conceals its hunger for power. When we first fall in love, everything feels weightless. The world glows, time slows. You start to believe you've found someone who finally sees you, someone who understands the hidden chambers of your soul. But Nietzsche would tell you that this illusion of being understood is part of love's cruelty. He once wrote that there is always some madness in love, but there is also always some reason in madness. The madness, he said, is that we believe love can free us, but the reason, the brutal truth, is that love enslaves us in ways more profound than we dare to admit. Think of it, a man who loves deeply is not liberated. He becomes obsessed with being chosen, with being enough, with holding on. He begins to crave control, not because he is evil, but because love makes him afraid. Afraid of losing what he believes gives his life meaning. And so power enters the equation quietly, like smoke filling a room. He wants to protect her, but protection becomes possession. He wants to cherish her, but cherishing becomes dependency. The same fire that once warmed him now burns with jealousy and fear. Nietzsche saw this as inevitable, because to love is to expose yourself to vulnerability, and human beings, he said, are built to resist vulnerability at all costs. For women, Nietzsche believed the dance was different but no less fierce. He observed, often controversially, that feminine power manifests not through domination but through allure, through the mysterious art of influencing without appearing to. He called it a higher form of strategy, one that men rarely recognize because it operates in silence. To Nietzsche, a woman's surrender was never real surrender. It was an act of power disguised as softness, a way of bending the world and the man toward her will. He admired it, even feared it, for he saw in it something primal and eternal, a force that could unmake the illusions of male supremacy with a single glance. But love in Nietzsche's world was never innocent. He saw in every relationship a quiet tug-of-war between the need to merge and the instinct to dominate. Two souls collide, each longing to be loved, but neither willing to fully submit. One gives more, the other holds back. One forgives, the other tests. Slowly, the balance of power shifts, and with it the very nature of love itself. What began as passion transforms into struggle. And yet it is within this struggle that Nietzsche believed we touch something real, something beyond the masks of politeness and morality. Because to him love stripped us bare. It revealed the truth we spend our lives hiding, that beneath all our talk of equality and romance, we still crave to be seen as powerful, desired, indispensable. We want the other to orbit around us. We want to be chosen again and again, not out of kindness but out of awe. Nietzsche didn't romanticize this, he didn't soften it with sentiment. He believed that to love honestly, one must face this brutal undercurrent, acknowledge it, and not pretend it doesn't exist. Imagine two lovers standing in the half-light of morning. They've fought the night before, words thrown like knives, silences that cut deeper than speech. Yet here they are, hands brushing in apology. In that gesture lies everything Nietzsche spoke of, the tension between wanting to yield and wanting to rule. They reach for peace, but even that peace is a negotiation of power. Who forgives first? Who softens? Who holds the silence longer? Love, he would say, is not harmony. It is the art of surviving this eternal tension without destroying each other. Nietzsche often spoke of the will to power, not as domination over others, but as the fundamental drive of all life. Every being, he said, strives to expand, to assert itself, to grow beyond its limits. Love, then, is not separate from this drive. It is its most deceptive form. We imagine love as selflessness, but Nietzsche saw it as the most refined expression of selfishness. When we say, "I love you," we are really saying, "You are mine. You complete the image I have of myself." It is not an accusation, but a truth about human nature that most of us would rather ignore. Yet Nietzsche was not cynical. Beneath his sharpness there was a strange tenderness, a recognition that this struggle between love and power is not a flaw to be fixed, but a reality to be embraced. He urged us to love with open eyes, to see the chaos and still choose it, to accept that real love is not about peace, but about growth, that it is not about equality, but about the dance, the constant rebalancing of power and surrender, the cycle of breaking and rebuilding that makes two souls evolve. And maybe that's why Nietzsche never stopped writing about love, even as he warned against it, because in his solitude he felt what most thinkers eventually feel, that to live without love is to live without the deepest mirror of the self. Love exposes us, it humiliates us, it crowns and destroys us in the same breath. It is the battlefield where the soul learns its strength, and Nietzsche, ever the warrior philosopher, knew that the only love worth having is the one that teaches you who you truly are, not the one that keeps you comfortable. There's a reason why his insights still sting today, because we live in a time that worships comfort, equality, and safety, all beautiful ideals, but ones that often strip love of its danger, its wildness, its capacity to wound and transform. Nietzsche would have laughed at our modern obsession with healthy relationships that never challenge, never destabilize. To him, the point of love was not to avoid pain, but to transcend it, not to find balance, but to burn, and in that burning to become something more powerful, more awake. He once said, "What is done out of love always takes place beyond good and evil." That line carries the full weight of his paradox. Love, he meant, is not moral or immoral. It simply is. It does not care for rules or for fairness. It's an elemental force, amoral in its beauty, divine in its cruelty. It breaks down the tidy boundaries of what's right or wrong, because it operates in a deeper dimension, one where passion and pain, dominance and surrender merge into something transcendent. If you've ever truly loved someone, you know this truth. You've felt the urge to possess, to protect, to prove yourself worthy. You've seen yourself become both hero and tyrant in the same hour. You've been wounded by indifference, resurrected by a smile. You've said, "I would do anything for you," and meant it, not out of nobility, but because their existence defines your own. That, Nietzsche would say, is the raw heart of the human condition. Love is not what redeems us, it's what reveals us. So what then? If love is a battlefield, if it is rooted in power, if it's driven by our will to assert and be seen, how do we love without destroying each other? Nietzsche would not offer comfort. He would not tell us to seek safety. He would tell us to rise above the illusions, to become creators of our own kind of love, one that acknowledges the struggle but is not enslaved by it. He would tell us to love not as beggars but as warriors, not seeking completion in the other, but expansion through them, to love not for peace but for transformation. Because in the end, Nietzsche's brutal truth is not meant to kill romance. It's meant to resurrect it in its truest, most dangerous form, the kind that strips away pretense and forces two souls to meet without masks. The kind that demands courage to face not only the other person, but the darkest parts of yourself reflected in them. The kind of love that burns, but leaves you reborn. And perhaps that's the greatest paradox of all, that in this struggle for power, in this clash between man and woman, between longing and control, something divine still flickers. Not the gentle flame of comfort, but the fierce fire of becoming. For Nietzsche, that was the point, that through love's cruelty we find our strength, through its madness we find meaning. When Nietzsche spoke of love as a struggle for power, he wasn't merely describing romance, he was describing the human soul itself. To him, everything alive seeks to expand its strength, to assert its essence upon the world. Even tenderness, he said, is a form of force, a gentle strategic strength. Love, then, is not the absence of power, but its most intimate battlefield, where our deepest instincts reveal themselves without disguise. He saw in men and women two great archetypal energies, not opposites, but counterweights, locked in eternal motion. Man, with his drive to create, to dominate, to leave his mark on the world. Woman, with her power to absorb, to influence, to shape the world from within. He believed that true connection could only exist when these forces respected each other's strength, when love was not submission, but the collision of equals. Yet he warned, equality does not mean sameness, it means standing unafraid before the other's fire. Imagine a relationship where both souls burn brightly, neither shrinking to please the other. There is tension there, yes, arguments that shake the walls, silences that test the heart, but also a vitality, a rawness that keeps the bond alive. Nietzsche would call this the Dionysian aspect of love, wild, ecstatic, creative, destructive. He contrasted it with the Apollonian, the orderly, polite version of affection society teaches us to admire. We're told love should be calm, patient, balanced. But Nietzsche saw that kind of love as deathly, sterilized by fear of conflict, stripped of mystery, drained of its power to transform. He believed that real love is dangerous precisely because it demands the death of who you were before. You cannot love deeply and remain unchanged. You must shed layers, pride, ego, illusions, and sometimes what's left after that shedding looks nothing like what you expected. Nietzsche saw in this destruction not tragedy, but creation. He called it the artist's love, a love that builds something new out of chaos. But this truth is hard to live with. Most of us want comfort, not transformation. We want someone who soothes, not someone who mirrors our darkness. Nietzsche saw that modern people, even in his time, had become too soft for love in its truest sense. He said we love in order not to lose ourselves, when the real purpose of love is to risk that loss, to let the other's presence shatter our certainties and force us to grow beyond them. That's why he said it is not a lack of love, but a lack of friendship that makes unhappy marriages. Because when love is built on illusion, it collapses under truth. But when love is built on respect for the other's strength, it becomes something immortal. He wrote about women with both admiration and unease. He saw them as guardians of mystery, beings closer to the rhythms of life, less corrupted by the abstract reason that plagued men. To Nietzsche, women instinctively understood the game of power, not through philosophy, but through intuition. Their strength was not to dominate openly, but to guide the flow of desire itself. In their presence, men encountered a mirror that reflected both their greatness and their insecurity. It terrified them, and yet it was through this mirror that a man could truly confront himself. That's why Nietzsche warned men not to seek obedient women, but women who challenge them. Only a woman who resists can awaken a man's highest potential. Submission breeds mediocrity. Struggle breeds greatness. In this sense, love was not meant to comfort. It was meant to elevate. It was a forge, and only those willing to burn in it would emerge reborn. Think of the lovers who change each other forever. The ones who collide like stars, leaving behind a new constellation. Their relationship may not last forever. Some burn out, others dissolve, but both leave marked, shaped, transformed. That, Nietzsche would say, is love fulfilled. Not the promise of permanence, but the courage to meet another soul completely, to risk annihilation for the sake of creation. Yet there is tragedy in his vision, for Nietzsche himself never found the love he described. He fell for Lou Salome, a brilliant, fiercely independent woman who saw him not as a prophet, but as a man. She admired him but refused to be conquered by him. Nietzsche was captivated by her intellect, her spirit, her defiance. In her he saw the embodiment of his own ideas, the woman who would neither submit nor yield, who would meet him as an equal force. But Lou, perhaps sensing the danger of his passion, chose her freedom instead. The rejection shattered him. He would never love again. Some say that was the moment the philosopher became the myth, when Nietzsche turned his pain into prophecy. He transformed heartbreak into philosophy, writing of love with the cold clarity of one who has lost it. He turned the personal into the eternal. And maybe that's why his words still cut so deeply, because they were born not from theory, but from the ashes of a man who dared to love beyond his own endurance. He came to believe that love, in its truest form, is not meant to be permanent. It is meant to awaken us, to reveal what we are capable of. He wrote, "The greatest happiness is to find that which compels us. Love compels us. It drives us to face the parts of ourselves we'd rather avoid. Jealousy, pride, need, fear. It drags us into the depths and forces us to confront the raw material of the soul. Only then can we create something higher. Only then can we understand what power really means." For Nietzsche, power was not control over another. It was mastery over oneself. The lover who clings, who manipulates, who fears loss, is still a slave, not to their partner, but to their own weakness. True power is the ability to love without possession, to give without calculation, to stand in the fire of passion without being consumed by it. That is the kind of love Nietzsche admired, fierce, fearless, unbound by morality. He saw in such love the same energy that drives all great art and creation. It is the fire that makes us write, build, dream, fight. it is the chaos that precedes every act of rebirth. That's why he wrote, one must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. Love is that chaos. It is the wound through which light enters. It is the storm that breaks us open so that something greater can be born. And yet, Nietzsche knew that few could handle this truth. Most people, he said, would rather cling to illusions than face the abyss that true love reveals. They prefer the comfort of romantic lies, that love is safe, pure, equal. But love is not safe, it is not pure, it is not equal. It is divine chaos, a sacred struggle that asks for everything and gives no guarantees. Those who fear it will spend their lives chasing shadows. Those who embrace it will be transformed forever. In the end, Nietzsche left us not with answers, but with an invitation to love without illusion, to see the beauty in the struggle, to understand that power and vulnerability are not enemies but twins. He urged us to let love be what it is, wild, imperfect, dangerous, alive, because only through such love do we meet the full truth of ourselves. And perhaps that's the final irony, that Nietzsche, who sought to unmask the illusions of love, ended up proving how inescapable it truly is. For even after all his warnings, all his philosophy, his heart still longed. He still believed that somewhere in the clash between man and woman, between passion and power, something sacred flickers, fragile, burning, eternal. Love remains the greatest test of strength, not because it conquers, but because it reveals who we really are when the masks fall away. In our modern world, Nietzsche's truth about love and power still lingers, like an echo we try to drown beneath soft words and digital affection. We tell ourselves that love has evolved, that it's now equal, enlightened, pure. We swipe, we match, we talk about boundaries and balance. But beneath the glow of our screens, the same ancient currents still pull at us, the same fear of losing control, the same hunger to be desired, to matter, to win. Nietzsche would have seen right through our modern performances. He would see the power games hidden behind texts and silence, the chase disguised as detachment, the subtle ways we manipulate each other's attention, the careful timing of replies, the unspoken strategies of seduction. Nothing new, he would say, only the costumes have changed. What we call modern love is simply the old struggle played out in the theater of technology. The will to power now lives in our algorithms, in the quiet competition for who can care less, who can seem more independent while craving connection the most. He would argue that equality, as we imagine it, hasn't erased the battle, it's only made it more complex. When men and women meet now, they meet not as conqueror and conquered, but as rivals pretending not to compete. Each one protecting their autonomy, terrified of vulnerability, yet secretly longing to surrender. Nietzsche might smile and say, "You are all philosophers of love now, endlessly analyzing what should simply be lived. You are trying to tame what was never meant to be tamed." Because love, he'd remind us, is not something to manage, it's something to survive. And the way we approach it today, through rules, through self-help, through endless talk of red flags and energy, proves how afraid we are of its power. We want love without danger, passion without pain, intimacy without loss. But Nietzsche's truth is that love without danger is not love at all. It's companionship, it's comfort. It's two people standing near each other, safe, untouched by the fire that could make them truly alive. He'd look at our generation and say, "You have traded the art of loving for the science of safety. You dissect love, you diagnose it, you label it toxic or healthy, as if it were an illness to be cured. You have forgotten that love is supposed to break you, not to fix you, because only in that breaking can something new emerge, an identity that was sleeping beneath your fear." Nietzsche would call that the birth of the higher self. Yet this brutal truth isn't meant to be bleak. It's liberating, because once you understand that the struggle within love is not a flaw but its essence, you stop fearing it. You begin to dance with it. You see your jealousy not as poison, but as proof of care. You recognize your desire for power as the longing to be seen, to matter, to leave a mark. You no longer demand perfection from your partner because you understand they are fighting the same invisible battle inside themselves. You stop trying to control love, and instead you learn to endure it. Nietzsche believed that the highest form of love was one that made both souls stronger, not the kind that shields you from pain, but the kind that forces you to face it with open eyes. He wrote, "The man of knowledge must be able not only to love his enemies, but also to hate his friends. In that paradox lies the secret." Real love requires a kind of holy cruelty, a willingness to let the other be free, even if that freedom costs you peace. It is not about taming, but witnessing, not about having, but allowing. Imagine a love like that, fierce but free. Two people who meet not to complete each other, but to challenge each other to rise higher. They argue, they wound, they heal, and in doing so they forge something indestructible. They are not afraid to see the darkness in each other, because they know it is the same darkness that gives depth to the light. That Nietzsche would say is the love of the Übermensch, the higher human, who no longer loves out of need but out of strength. And what of power? Nietzsche's will to power was never about domination in the vulgar sense. It was the drive to affirm life, to say yes to existence even when it hurts. In love, that means saying yes to the full spectrum of feeling, to the ecstasy and the despair, the pride and the humiliation. To love with Nietzschean courage is to stop resisting the truth that love will hurt you, will change you, will leave scars. But those scars are not signs of weakness, they are proof that you have lived. He would tell us that love is not a fairy tale, it's a test. It's where our philosophies are stripped away and we face the naked question, who are you when someone has power over your heart? That question terrifies us because it exposes everything we hide behind, the roles, the personas, the armor. But Nietzsche believed that this exposure is precisely what makes love sacred. Only when you are defenseless can you discover what kind of soul you truly have, and so the battlefield of love becomes not a war between man and woman, but a crucible for becoming. Every heartbreak, every rejection, every silence that tears you apart is an invitation to evolve. Nietzsche would whisper, don't flee from it, don't curse it, become worthy of it, because to love and lose is still greater than to live untouched by the fire. In the end, Nietzsche's vision of love is neither cynical nor sentimental, it's heroic. It asks for courage, not comfort. It demands that we stop treating love as a sanctuary and start seeing it as a path. A dangerous, beautiful, necessary path towards self-overcoming. For him, to love is to say to the universe, yes, break me if you must, but I will become more because of it, and perhaps that is the final gift Nietzsche leaves us, the realization that love and power are not enemies. They are the twin forces that shape every human heart. Power without love becomes tyranny, love without power becomes submission. But when they meet, when two people stand face to face, strong enough to hold both, something divine happens. The world itself seems to expand, because in that moment, love is no longer a cage, it becomes creation. Two wills, united not by need but by choice, daring to build something that defies time. That is what Nietzsche meant when he said, the secret of a joyful life is to live dangerously. To love dangerously is to live truthfully, to walk through the storm with eyes open, knowing that every wound is the price of becoming real. And when the dust settles, when the struggle quiets and the fire fades into embers, those who have loved like that carry a strange peace. Not the peace of safety, but the peace of those who have seen the truth and survived it. Nietzsche's brutal truth about love is not meant to destroy our faith in it. It's meant to awaken us to its sacred power. For love is not the opposite of power. Love is power, the oldest, wildest kind there is. Nietzsche would look at our century of self-help and therapy and endless discourse about love and smile, not with contempt, but with that knowing sadness he reserved for souls that had forgotten how to suffer beautifully. He would see how we have made love into a product, a checklist of compatibility and emotional intelligence, stripped of the danger that once gave it meaning. He would say we have turned the art of love into an algorithm, the sacred fire into a calculation of risk. But if we listen closely, his philosophy offers not despair but a path back to something raw and alive, a way of loving that doesn't hide from pain but grows through it, a way of seeing power not as something to fear but as something to master within ourselves. Nietzsche's brutal truth, when seen clearly, is not about cynicism, it's about courage. It's a challenge to rise above the smallness of comfort and to love as creators, not as consumers. He would tell us to look inward first. To understand that before we can love anyone honestly, we must confront the chaos within ourselves. Because if we enter love hoping to be completed, we will only find dependency. If we enter it hoping to dominate, we will only find emptiness. The true will to power, he'd remind us, begins with self-mastery, the ability to hold our own storms without unleashing them blindly on others, to know our shadows and still dare to offer warmth. That kind of strength does not come from perfection, it comes from humility. the acceptance that we are all fractured, all yearning, all afraid. Nietzsche's highest wisdom was that there is no nobility without suffering, no greatness without the scars of defeat. To love deeply is to let someone see those scars and not flinch when they show you theirs. It's to stand in the same room, both bleeding, and still say, "I choose to stay." He believed that the future of love, if humanity were to evolve, must be built on this kind of strength. Not the strength that conquers others, but the strength that refuses to hide. A relationship between two powerful souls would not seek to erase difference, but to celebrate it. They would not fuse into one being, for that would mean the death of creation. Instead, they would orbit each other like stars, each complete, each radiant, each drawing the other higher. He once wrote that the secret of all great relationships is distance, not emotional coldness, but reverence. The space between two people is sacred ground, the tension that allows desire, the respect that allows individuality. We destroy love, he said, when we try to own it. Possession kills what it claims to protect. Only in freedom can love breathe. And yet that freedom is terrifying, because to love someone freely means to accept the risk that they may leave, that they may change, that they may outgrow you. To accept that is to love without illusion, to love as Nietzsche loved life itself, with a fierce, unflinching yes. He would tell us to stop demanding guarantees from love, to stop asking for it to be safe, because nothing worth having ever is. The moment you demand safety, you build walls, and walls suffocate the soul. The purpose of love is not to make life easier, it's to make it more intense, more awake, more honest. That's why Nietzsche believed that those who love deeply live more fully, even if they suffer more deeply too. It's not the absence of pain that defines a life, it's the magnitude of what you dared to feel. If we lived by that truth, perhaps love today would look different. We would stop treating relationships as negotiations of comfort and begin seeing them as collaborations of becoming. We would stop measuring compatibility by shared interests and start asking, can this person challenge me to grow? Can I stand their strength without needing to diminish it? Can I admire their freedom without fearing it? Nietzsche would say that only when two strong souls meet, souls that have already faced their own abyss, can true love begin, because then love is no longer a refuge from loneliness, it is a celebration of it. Two solitudes that border each other, he might say, each protecting the other's sacred interior. This is not the love of fairy tales, but of philosophers and poets, of warriors and artists. It's not about happily ever after, it's about eternally becoming. He would have looked at modern men and women, locked in debates about dominance and equality, and urged them to rise beyond those categories. There are no eternal genders, he might say, only eternal forces. Masculine and feminine are not cages, they are currents. When they meet, they can either destroy or create. The question is not who holds more power, but who has the courage to wield it with grace. Because the most terrifying thing Nietzsche knew, and the most beautiful, is that love will always destroy something. Your illusions, your vanity, your control. It will strip you bare until all that remains is the truth. And if you can stand in that truth, trembling but unbroken, you will have touched eternity. In that sense, Nietzsche's philosophy of love is not about despair, it's about transcendence. It invites us to love in a way that leaves us wiser, freer, stronger, to see the other not as salvation, but as a mirror of our own becoming, to accept that love will not fix us, but it will awaken us. And maybe that's what love is meant to do, not to complete us, but to shatter us open to the infinite, to make us see that the same fire that can destroy us is also the one that makes us alive, that the same struggle for power that divides us is also what drives us to connect, to create, to transcend. In the end, Nietzsche's brutal truth about love and power is not a condemnation, it's a reminder. But every time we dare to love, we are stepping into the arena of life itself. We are confronting the chaos, the fear, the desire, and saying, yes, I will still love. That yes is the will to power. That yes is the heart of creation. Because when love stops being a fairy tale and becomes a philosophy, it ceases to be about finding the right person and becomes about becoming the kind of person who can truly love. Someone strong enough to give without owning, brave enough to stay without clinging, and wise enough to let go when it's time. And in that, Nietzsche would see the highest art, not the art of romance, but the art of existence itself, the great defiant, beautiful act of saying yes to love, to power, to life, even when it hurts. And yet beneath Nietzsche's shadow, a strange tenderness remains. He wrote of love as if it were a battlefield. Yes, but even battle implies passion, purpose, an intensity of being alive that cannot exist in apathy. When Nietzsche speaks of love, he is not sneering at it, he is mourning it. He is standing over the grave of something he wished could have been sacred, but which he found contaminated by weakness, illusion and dependency. His words sting not because they are cruel, but because they expose a truth about our own hunger for control beneath the veil of affection. He believed that every relationship at its core is a negotiation of power, and this is what unsettles us. For we like to think that love transcends such things, that in love there is equality, surrender and harmony. But Nietzsche's laughter rings through time, mocking the sentiment. He asks, can there ever truly be equality in desire? When two people love each other, one always loves more, one always bends more, one always fears loss more, and in that asymmetry, he says, lies the seed of domination. Look closely, and you begin to see what he saw, the subtle tug-of-war between affection and ambition, between tenderness and the will to command. The man who wishes to be adored becomes a tyrant of validation. The woman who wishes to be chosen becomes a manipulator of devotion. Love becomes a performance of power, masked by the poetry of care. Nietzsche didn't invent this cynicism, he merely had the courage to name it. He was not saying that love cannot exist, he was saying that pure love, love untainted by the will to possess, is almost impossible for human beings, because to love without wanting to own, to influence, or to matter more than others would require the death of the ego itself. And that, Nietzsche argued, is something few ever achieve. He saw this most clearly in his own heartbreak, his love for Lou Salome, the brilliant woman who fascinated both his intellect and his pride. Lou was the embodiment of everything Nietzsche desired and despised in love. She was free, independent, untamable. She refused to marry him, refused to belong to anyone, and instead built her life on the very philosophy he preached: self-overcoming, freedom from moral constraint, the creation of one's own destiny. Nietzsche adored her, and yet her refusal shattered him. It was as if his philosophy had turned against him, embodied in the very woman who denied him. From this wound, his ideas about love darkened further. He began to see love not as salvation, but as struggle, a test of strength. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he wrote, "You go to women, do not forget your whip." It is one of his most misunderstood lines, often cited as evidence of misogyny, but in truth it was metaphor. The whip was not literal, it symbolized the need to confront love with strength, not submission. Nietzsche feared that men, when in love, lost themselves, that they became servants to their longing. The whip was not for women, it was for the man himself, a reminder to remain sovereign, even in passion. In Nietzsche's world, love was not soft, it was a storm. It demanded resilience, clarity, and an unflinching will. To love someone truly, he believed, was to love their freedom, not their obedience. But such love comes at a cost. It requires you to accept that you might lose them, that their destiny may not include you, that their happiness might grow beyond your reach. And for most people, that is unbearable. Nietzsche's tragedy was that he understood love too deeply to be naive, but too human to stop longing for it. His philosophy was born not from arrogance, but from heartbreak, the kind that strips you bare and forces you to rebuild your soul from ashes. His rejection by Lou Salome was not just personal, it was existential. It showed him the abyss between man's hunger for connection and his need for control. He realized that what we call love often disguises a deeper will, the will to be necessary, to be the center of another's universe. And yet he did not condemn this entirely. He saw in it the raw force of life itself, the desire to dominate, to create, to influence. These were not evils to Nietzsche, they were expressions of vitality. What he rejected was the denial of this truth, the pretense that love is purely altruistic. He wanted us to see love as it really is, a dance of power, but also of beauty, courage, and the eternal striving of two souls trying impossibly to meet. This is why Nietzsche remains both feared and admired. He does not comfort us, he confronts us, he strips love of its romantic illusions, but in doing so he reveals something more profound, that beneath the struggle, beneath the pride and the pain, love is still the most human act of all. Because even when we fail at it, even when it breaks us, it proves that we are still reaching beyond ourselves. still daring to merge with another consciousness, to risk annihilation for the chance of transcendence. And maybe in that sense, Nietzsche was wrong. Maybe love isn't just a power struggle. Maybe it's also the only moment when we transcend it. For in love, even briefly, the will to power collapses into something greater, the will to understand, to witness, to be seen, not as conqueror or conquered, but as soul to soul. Nietzsche would never have admitted it, but perhaps his philosophy itself was a love letter, not to a woman but to the possibility of union between power and tenderness, strength and vulnerability, truth and longing. His brutal truth about love was also his confession that he could not stop believing in it, even as he tried to tear it apart. He once wrote, "There is always some madness in love, but there is also always some reason in madness." In that single line the mask falls. The man who dissected love with surgical precision also saw its divine absurdity, its ability to make us mad, yes, but also to make us alive. As the years passed and his mind began to crumble under the weight of illness, Nietzsche's final writings became softer, almost childlike. He began signing his letters as Dionysus, the god of ecstasy, of passion, of creative chaos. The same man who warned against love's illusions ended his life consumed by the very forces he once tried to master. In the end, perhaps Nietzsche didn't overcome love. Perhaps love overcame him. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Not that love is weakness, nor that power corrupts it, but that both are mirrors of the same divine hunger. The hunger to become more than what we are. To give ourselves away, and in that giving, to find a truer version of ourselves. So when Nietzsche speaks of love and power, he is not telling us to choose one over the other. He is reminding us that to love deeply, to love fiercely, is to enter a sacred war, not against another, but against the illusion that we can ever possess them. The goal is not victory, it is transformation. In the end, perhaps love is not meant to be understood through philosophy at all. It is meant to be lived with all its contradictions, fierce yet fragile, proud yet trembling. Nietzsche's truth about love may have been brutal, but buried within it lies something luminous, the idea that through the struggle of love, we meet the full intensity of existence itself. And when we do, when we stand in that storm between power and surrender, between desire and loss, we finally understand what Nietzsche meant when he said one must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. Love, he might say, is that chaos, and every star, every act of greatness, every moment of beauty we create, begins with it. In the final years of his life, as Nietzsche's body weakened and his mind drifted into that eerie twilight between lucidity and madness, his philosophy began to feel less like an argument and more like a confession whispered into the void. The man who once stood proudly against the tides of convention, who declared the death of God and the rise of the Übermensch, now found himself haunted by the very human ache he could never fully transcend, the longing to be loved without losing himself. His letters from that time, often erratic, sometimes poetic, reveal a soul still wrestling with tenderness. He wrote to his sister, to old friends, to no one in particular, fragments of thoughts about music, divinity and love. There's something heartbreaking in them, a quiet realization that all his grand philosophies about power and freedom had come at a price. He had conquered illusion, yes, but at the cost of intimacy. He had unmasked love, but in doing so, he had frightened it away. And yet, there's beauty in that solitude, because Nietzsche's vision of love, stripped of sentimentality, stripped of the comforting lies, forces us to ask a question few dare to face: what remains when love is no longer a promise of completion, but an act of creation? He would say that love in its truest form is not the merging of two halves into a whole. It is the meeting of two complete beings who choose to collide, knowing they may wound each other, knowing that one may grow while the other falters, and yet daring to meet anyway. That to Nietzsche was love at its highest, not a refuge but a crucible, not the end of loneliness but its most glorious expression. In his own strange way, Nietzsche's ideas about love and power were never meant to destroy romance, they were meant to deepen it. He wanted love to be honest, to acknowledge the forces that pulse beneath its surface, the jealousy, the admiration, the desire to be seen as irreplaceable, the secret hope to be both worshipped and understood. All of these, he believed, were not signs of corruption, but proof that love is rooted in life itself, wild, imperfect, endlessly striving. He once compared lovers to two stars orbiting each other, close enough to feel the pull of gravity, but too distant to ever collide without destruction. That image, more than any of his darker words, captures the tragic beauty of his vision. Love, for Nietzsche, was not about possession, it was about orbit, the gravitational tension that keeps two souls in motion, forever circling, forever illuminating each other from afar. And perhaps that's why his philosophy still resonates in our age of fragile egos and endless longing. We live in a time where love is both idolized and feared, where connection is instantaneous but intimacy is fleeting. Nietzsche's warnings echo louder now than ever. He reminds us that love, when built on dependency, becomes a cage, that to truly love someone we must be willing to let them be free, even if that freedom means they might leave us. This is where love and power intertwine most painfully. To love someone powerfully is to give them the power to destroy you and to trust that they won't. To Nietzsche, that trust, that reckless faith, was perhaps the bravest act a human being could commit, because in that surrender you are no longer hiding behind philosophy, pride or will. You are standing naked before the mystery of another soul. It's ironic then that Nietzsche, the man accused of being a nihilist, of stripping meaning from the world, actually gave love one of its most sacred meanings, by seeing it not as a comfort but as a confrontation, by refusing to let it be sentimental, by demanding that love be as fierce, as honest, as life itself. He would say, do not seek love to escape your solitude. Seek it to test its strength. Do not love because you are incomplete. Love because you are overflowing. Love not as a beggar seeking warmth, but as a creator shaping beauty out of chaos. For only then can love be something divine, not in the religious sense, but in the sense that it transforms you into more than you were before. And maybe that's the secret Nietzsche never said outright, that love and power are not enemies but reflections of the same impulse, the will to become, the will to expand, the will to say yes to existence, even in its cruelty. Love, like power, demands courage. It asks you to face rejection, to risk humiliation, to give without guarantee. It asks you to live dangerously, the very thing Nietzsche called the highest virtue. Live dangerously, he wrote. Build your cities on the slopes of Vesuvius. That is what love is, a city on the edge of a volcano, beautiful, fragile, always at risk of being undone, but still worth building, still worth watching burn, if only to rebuild it again. So perhaps Nietzsche's brutal truth about love and power between men and women is not a condemnation at all. Perhaps it's an invitation to love with eyes wide open, to see the storm for what it is, and to step into it anyway. To embrace the paradox that love both humbles and empowers us, that it reveals our weakness and our strength in the same breath. In the end, Nietzsche died alone, his mind fractured, his body frail, but his ideas lived on, not because they were cold, but because they burned with the fever of a man who wanted to feel everything. His philosophy was never about destruction, it was about transformation, the raw alchemy of turning pain into wisdom and loneliness into art. And perhaps, somewhere in that final flicker of consciousness, as his thoughts dissolved into the eternal silence he had so long contemplated, Nietzsche understood what his words had always been reaching for. Not dominance, not despair, but something infinitely fragile, infinitely human. The truth that love, even when it wounds us, is still the most powerful proof that life in all its chaos, beauty and cruelty was worth saying yes to. Because to love, truly and without illusion, is to live as Nietzsche demanded we live, dangerously, passionately, and without apology. And in that danger, in that surrender, we find the one thing that even Nietzsche could not conquer, the unbearable, magnificent tenderness of being alive. There is a haunting irony in Nietzsche's life that lingers like an aftertaste in history's memory. The man who declared that God is dead did not leave behind a cold void, but rather a world trembling with the weight of meaning we must now create ourselves. His brutal truth about love and power was not meant to strip life of warmth, but to force us to stand in the naked light of reality and still find something worth adoring. He was, at heart, a lover of life, of beauty, of strength, of the human spirit in its rawest, most unguarded form. And love, even when he dissected it mercilessly, remained the pulse beneath his every word. When Nietzsche wrote of the will to power, he wasn't speaking merely of dominance or hierarchy. He was speaking of the creative force that drives everything alive, the same force that makes a flower push through stone, that makes an artist paint, that makes a lover reach out for another heartbeat in the dark. To him, power was not the opposite of love, it was love's hidden twin, its shadow and its mirror. Both arise from the same hunger to affirm existence, to say yes to the agony and the ecstasy of being human. He saw that in love, this same will manifests in disguise. We say we want to care for someone, to protect them, to cherish them, but beneath it there is a desire to matter, to shape, to influence, to leave a mark on their soul. We want to be remembered. We want to be the gravity that pulls another life into orbit around ours. Nietzsche did not condemn this. He called it what it is, the expression of vitality itself. To love, he believed, is to want to create something through another person, to see your own power reflected in their joy. But therein lies the danger, for when love becomes possession, when the will to power eclipses the will to understanding, the beauty turns to cruelty. Nietzsche saw this too. He saw how easily love curdles into control, how quickly affection becomes a battlefield. And yet he refused to retreat into cynicism. Instead, he offered a challenge to love as creators, not consumers, to love as those who give form to the world, not those who seek to own it. Imagine for a moment a man and a woman standing at the edge of a cliff. The wind is tearing through their hair, the sea roaring below. They reach for each other, not for safety, not for escape, but for the sheer defiance of being alive together at the precipice. That is Nietzsche's vision of love. Two beings strong enough to face the abyss without collapsing into it. Two souls who can look into each other's eyes and see, not salvation but recognition. In this, Nietzsche gave us perhaps his most paradoxical gift, the idea that love, to be pure, must exist between equals, and yet equality in his view was not sameness. It was balance. It was the dance between forces that challenge and complete each other. He admired women who were independent, spirited, dangerous, not because they were gentle but because they could hold their ground in the storm. He once said, "When you go to a woman, take your whip," and people mistake that line for cruelty, when in truth it was a metaphor for strength. It meant, do not come to love weakly, do not come expecting comfort, come ready to wrestle with fire. He understood that love requires tension, that the friction between man and woman, between strength and vulnerability, between dominance and surrender, is what creates the spark. Without tension, there is no flame. Without resistance, there is no growth. Nietzsche saw love as the arena where human greatness is forged, where we confront our own contradictions and learn what we are made of. It is easy to misread Nietzsche's brutal truths as bitterness, but if you read him closely, you'll see that beneath every sharp line is a longing for transcendence. He did not want to destroy love. He wanted to purify it. He wanted to strip away the lies that turn it into a transaction, the moral conventions, the dependency, the fear disguised as devotion, and find the raw core beneath. He wanted love to be a crucible for transformation. In his mind, the greatest love is one that does not seek to complete, but to awaken. It does not rescue you from solitude, it deepens it. It does not promise happiness, it demands greatness. To love someone in Nietzsche's sense is to see in them the divine possibility of what they could become and to challenge them toward it. It is to look at another human being and say, I will not make you small so that I can feel big. I will not chain you to my need. I will stand beside you as you grow, even if that growth takes you away from me. Few people can love like that. It requires a strength most do not possess. But Nietzsche believed that if humanity is to evolve, if we are to become the creators of meaning in a godless world, then that is the kind of love we must learn. A love that does not cling, a love that dares, a love that celebrates the will to power, not as domination but as creation. He once wrote that the higher man is one who can transform his suffering into joy. Love for him was the ultimate test of that ability, because love will always bring suffering, jealousy, longing, loss. But if one can take that suffering and make from it something beautiful, something radiant, then one has truly lived, and perhaps that's where Nietzsche's story leads us, to a kind of redemption he never named outright, that even in his solitude, even in his madness, he gave us a map to a love that is neither illusion nor despair, but creation. A love that does not beg for eternity, but burns brightly for as long as it must. In the silence of his final years, as he wandered through the ruins of his own mind, perhaps Nietzsche was no longer the philosopher or the provocateur. Perhaps he had become what he had always wanted to be, a man who dared to live without illusions, and who even in his breaking affirmed life. Because in the end, his truth about love and power was not about conquering others. It was about conquering oneself. The need to possess, the fear of loss, the hunger for control. Only by mastering these, he believed, could we ever touch something real. So maybe Nietzsche's brutal truth is not a warning, but a revelation that love, stripped of its comforts, remains the most sacred act of rebellion in a world ruled by fear. To love without owning, to give without begging, to stand in the storm and still say, yes, this is life, and I will love it anyway. And that perhaps is Nietzsche's final whisper across the centuries, that the greatest power is not in domination, but in the courage to love fiercely, freely, and without illusion, and to let that love shape the world anew. There's a quiet moment that comes after the storm of Nietzsche's words, a silence that feels almost sacred, as though the echoes of his defiance have dissolved into something softer, something closer to peace. And it is in that silence that we begin to see the full shape of his truth. Nietzsche did not set out to destroy love, nor to mock it. What he wanted was to drag it out of the shadows of sentimentality and back into the sunlight of reality, where it could breathe, bleed, and become beautiful again. He believed that most people do not truly love. They merely seek comfort in another person's existence. They want a reflection, not a mirror. They want to be adored for what they already are, not challenged to become more. But love, Nietzsche argued, should never be a resting place. It should be a furnace, a place where both souls are melted, reshaped, and reborn. That's why his vision of love sounds brutal to the modern ear, because he demands from it the same courage he demands from life. To him, love that does not risk destruction is not love at all. It is decoration. It is the illusion of connection built upon fear, fear of loneliness, fear of failure, fear of change. Nietzsche's love, if it can even be called that, is a storm that strips away the lies until only the truth remains, that two beings meet not to escape themselves, but to find themselves reflected in another fire. And perhaps that's why Nietzsche's relationships always ended in tragedy. He loved ideas as much as he loved people, and his ideas were too fierce, too unyielding, too vast for any ordinary bond. Lou Salome understood this. She saw that Nietzsche's love was not meant for possession. It was an invocation, a calling forth of greatness. But to love Nietzsche was to be scorched by the intensity of his spirit. He wanted not a companion, but a co-creator, someone who could stare into the abyss beside him and not flinch. When Lou refused him, Nietzsche did not just lose a woman. He lost the mirror that reflected the divine fire he saw within himself. And that loss birthed something deeper, his transformation from man to myth, from lover to philosopher. It was as if heartbreak itself became his muse, teaching him that creation often requires the death of comfort. In the ashes of his rejected love, he discovered a new kind of power, not over others, but over the meaning of his own suffering. That perhaps is where Nietzsche's philosophy of love and power converges most beautifully. Love, he realized, is not about domination or submission. It is about transformation. It is about using the energy of desire, the chaos, the pain, the yearning, as raw material for creation. The same force that drives a man to possess another can drive him to build, to write, to dream, to transcend. In that sense, love becomes a form of art. And every true artist, Nietzsche believed, must be willing to sacrifice comfort for creation. He must be willing to stand alone, misunderstood, and still say yes to the unbearable weight of existence. Love, then, becomes the most artistic act of all, because it asks us to shape beauty out of chaos, to see the divine even in heartbreak, to turn loss into wisdom. Think of the way two lovers argue, not because they hate each other, but because something within them is trying to expand. The friction, the misunderstanding, the intensity. It's not failure, it's energy. It's the will to power, expressing itself, pushing both souls towards something larger than either of them alone. Nietzsche saw that in this struggle lies the essence of human greatness, to endure contradiction without losing the will to create meaning from it. He once wrote, "You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star." What he meant was that creation, whether of art, of philosophy, or of love, is born from tension, not harmony. Without chaos there is no transformation. Without the pain of difference there is no beauty. To Nietzsche, the lovers who survive are not the ones who live peacefully, but the ones who fight beautifully, who wrestle with each other's power without trying to destroy it. That's why, for him, the highest form of love was not romantic but spiritual, the love between souls who make each other greater, the kind of love that demands solitude as much as intimacy, the kind that does not dissolve into dependency but burns brighter with freedom. This, he thought, was the love that gives birth to civilizations, to art, to the divine spark in humanity itself. And yet there is still tenderness in all this. Beneath his fierce words and merciless clarity, Nietzsche remained human. He ached, he longed, he wept. His philosophy may have armored his mind, but it could not silence his heart. In the fragments of his later writings, we see flashes of that vulnerability, hints that even after all his reasoning, he still believed in something sacred about love. Not in its purity, but in its power to make us feel. Because what is power, after all, if not the ability to feel deeply, to let life move through you, to let it hurt and heal and reshape you? That is what Nietzsche wanted, not a life of safety, but of intensity, and love, in all its chaos, offered him that intensity. Even in heartbreak, even in madness, love gave him something that philosophy alone could not, a reason to feel alive. So perhaps his brutal truth was never meant to be cruel. Perhaps it was meant to free us, to remind us that love does not need to be perfect to be profound, that it is not our purity, but our passion, that makes it sacred, that the struggle between man and woman, between power and surrender, between independence and intimacy, is not a flaw in love, it is love. And if we can face that struggle without retreating into fantasy or fear, if we can embrace it as the price of being fully alive, then maybe, just maybe, we will have understood Nietzsche's deepest truth. That love, like life, is not meant to comfort us, it is meant to awaken us. Because in the end, it is not the gentle hearts that shape the world, but the ones that dare to break. And Nietzsche, for all his darkness, gave us permission to love fiercely, not as a dream, but as an act of rebellion, a declaration that even in a world without guarantees, without gods, without safety, we will still choose to love. Because to love, knowing it might destroy you, is the most powerful thing a human being can do. And that perhaps is Nietzsche's most haunting legacy, that love, stripped of illusion and freed from fear, remains the most beautiful expression of power we will ever know. But perhaps Nietzsche's most haunting insight about love was that it is not merely a sentimental or romantic phenomenon, it is a battlefield of wills. In every embrace, he suggested, there is a quiet negotiation of power. Even the most tender expressions of affection conceal a subtle struggle over dominance and surrender. To love deeply, he believed, is to expose oneself to the possibility of subjugation, to willingly give another person the power to wound you. And that, to Nietzsche, was the most dangerous act of all. He saw in love a paradox that both elevates and destroys. When a man loves a woman, he does not simply admire her beauty or cherish her kindness. He is drawn to her mystery, to the chaos she brings into his carefully constructed order. And when a woman loves a man, she too is drawn not merely to his gentleness but to his strength, to the fire that burns within him. Nietzsche believed that love at its core is a dance between order and chaos, a perpetual tension between the masculine will to assert and the feminine power to attract, to pull that will into surrender. In this sense, he saw love not as the harmony of two souls, but as the collision of two forces, each shaping, wounding, and transforming the other. Love, he once wrote, is the state in which man sees things most decidedly as they are not. For him, love was a form of creative blindness, a necessary illusion that allows two individuals to merge, if only briefly, despite their differences. But behind that illusion, there is always something more primal at work, the desire for power, the hunger to possess, the longing to be desired in return. Nietzsche's reflections were not born from detachment, but from experience. He knew the agony of unrequited love, the kind that gnaws at the soul and leaves it raw. His infatuation with Lou Salome was not simply romantic, it was existential. She represented the unattainable ideal, the embodiment of both intellect and independence, a woman who refused to be conquered. Nietzsche desired her not just as a companion, but as an equal in spirit, a partner who could walk beside him into the fire of his ideas. Yet she rejected him, and in her refusal, Nietzsche glimpsed the cold geometry of human relationships, that love often thrives on inequality, that one always loves more, and that imbalance is what gives passion its edge. From that wound, his philosophy deepened. He began to see that power and love are intertwined, not because humans are cruel, but because they are creators. To love is to project oneself outward, to shape the beloved into something ideal, to mold reality into one's image. but that act of creation also risks destroying the beloved's independence. The one who loves too much becomes enslaved by their own desire. The one who is loved too little becomes the master, holding the power to grant or withhold affection. This, Nietzsche thought, is the cruel arithmetic of intimacy. He warned against the illusion of equality in love. True equality, he claimed, cannot exist between man and woman, not because one is superior, but because they embody different expressions of the will to power. The man, driven by the instinct to create and conquer, seeks affirmation through admiration and achievement. The woman, embodying the instinct to attract and influence, wields her power through subtlety and emotional intelligence. They are not meant to mirror each other, but to challenge each other, to provoke growth through tension. Yet Nietzsche was not cynical about love. For all his stark realism, there was a strange tenderness beneath his words. He did not despise affection or romance. He simply refused to sentimentalize them. He believed that the highest form of love is one that recognizes the truth of its own power struggle and embraces it consciously. To love well, he suggested, is not to deny the will to power, but to transmute it, to turn that raw desire into something creative, life-affirming and transformative. In one of his most striking insights, Nietzsche wrote that every great love begins with admiration, but must evolve into respect. The initial intoxication of desire, he said, is like a fever. It blinds us to reality, allowing the imagination to fill in the gaps. But as that fever fades, the question arises, can we love the other as they truly are, not as we wish them to be? For Nietzsche, that was the test of strength, not to cling to illusion, but to love without possession, to will the other's freedom even when it threatens your own. This is perhaps where Nietzsche's view becomes most unsettling. He suggests that the very essence of love lies in its impermanence, its fragility. To demand eternal devotion is, in his view, to deny the truth of human nature, that we are ever-changing, restless beings, driven by forces beyond our control. The beauty of love, then, is not in its duration but in its intensity. What is done out of love, he wrote, always takes place beyond good and evil. In that sentence lies his most dangerous idea, that love in its purest form transcends morality, convention, even logic. It is both divine and destructive. Nietzsche's brutal truth about love and power between men and women, then, is not that one must dominate the other, but that both must learn to wield their power consciously. To love without awareness is to be devoured by it. To love with awareness, to see the other not as an object but as a force of nature, is to step into the same realm as the artist, the philosopher, the creator. It is to accept that love will wound you, but that in the wounding you might discover who you truly are. The modern world, with its hunger for comfort and equality, often resists Nietzsche's view. We prefer the fantasy that love can be pure, untainted by ego or ambition, but Nietzsche's lens cuts through that illusion like a blade. He shows us that the friction between man and woman, the push and pull of dominance and surrender, is not a flaw but the very engine of their connection. Without struggle there is no depth. Without risk there is no passion. Without power there is no love. And so his words linger like smoke in the air. Love is not peace, it is war, but it is a war worth fighting, a war that refines the soul through suffering, that transforms loneliness into art, that turns the chaos of desire into the beauty of becoming. For Nietzsche, to love is to face the abyss, and to smile back at it. In the end, Nietzsche's reflections on love and power are not instructions but revelations, mirrors that show us the depths of our own contradictions. He invites us to look at love not as something that completes us, but as something that confronts us. For when we love, we are forced to face every illusion we've ever built about who we are. We discover how easily tenderness can turn into control, how desire can become dependency, how affection can mask the fear of abandonment. Love for Nietzsche is not salvation, it is exposure. It reveals what we truly worship, not the other person, but our own longing to transcend ourselves through them. In this way, Nietzsche's understanding of love is inseparable from his understanding of power. For him, power is not merely domination, it is vitality, creation, the force that propels life forward. Every human being, he believed, is driven by this will, the desire not just to survive but to expand, to express, to become something greater. And love, in its highest form, is an arena where this will to power is tested, refined, and sometimes broken. It is not about submission or conquest, but about transformation. Two people meet, each with their own fire, and for a moment their flames intertwine. If they are wise, they do not try to extinguish the other's fire, they let it burn beside their own, even if it scorches them. Nietzsche's ideal was not the soft, sentimental union of souls that poets and preachers often describe, but the creative tension between equals who challenge each other to rise higher. He believed that the greatest relationships are those that awaken something fierce and alive within us, that force us to confront our own limitations. What is great in man, he wrote, is that he is a bridge and not an end. And perhaps that is what love truly is, a bridge between two worlds, never a final destination. It is through love that we glimpse the divine, not because it brings peace, but because it brings struggle that purifies the spirit. Nietzsche's critics often accused him of being too harsh, too unfeeling, too analytical about something as delicate as love. But his harshness was not born of contempt, it was born of honesty. He believed that only through facing the uncomfortable truths of love could we free ourselves from the illusions that make us weak. To him, dependence disguised as devotion was the greatest danger. He saw how men often sought in women not partners but validation, how women were taught to find in men not freedom but safety. Both, in his view, were forms of bondage disguised as love. True love, he argued, begins only when both individuals stand on their own, when neither seeks to complete the other, but to celebrate their separate wholeness. That is why he once wrote, "It is not a lack of love, but a lack of friendship that makes unhappy marriages." Friendship, to Nietzsche, was the soul of lasting love, a bond between equals who respect each other's strength. Passion may ignite the fire, but friendship sustains it. Without mutual respect, love decays into ownership. Without independence, affection becomes need. Nietzsche wanted a love that could survive truth, a love that could endure freedom, a love that did not demand the other to shrink in order to stay. And yet beneath his intellectual armor, there was a quiet melancholy in his reflections. He knew that such love is rare. Most people, he believed, are too afraid to love freely because true love threatens the ego. It demands vulnerability without illusion, strength without control. It demands that we see the other not as a possession, but as a mystery that can never be fully known. To love in that way is to stand before something vast and uncontrollable, something divine, and to say yes to it even knowing it might destroy you. That, perhaps, was Nietzsche's most daring truth, that love is not meant to make us comfortable but conscious. It is a spiritual trial by fire. It burns away the false and leaves only what is real, and what is real is rarely what we expect. Love reveals not who the other is, but who we are when confronted with the possibility of losing ourselves. It is not about harmony, it is about becoming. It is not about security, it is about evolution. The highest love, Nietzsche believed, is not the love that seeks to possess, but the love that gives the other the freedom to grow, even if it means growing away. In this way, his philosophy offers a kind of tragic beauty. It tells us that love and power will always coexist, not as enemies but as dance partners. One moves, the other responds. One asserts, the other yields. And in that delicate exchange, something transcendent can happen. Two forces collide, not to destroy, but to create, to give birth to something greater than either could achieve alone. Nietzsche's brutal truth, then, is not that love is doomed by power, but that it is defined by it. The struggle between man and woman, between strength and surrender, between desire and independence, this is not a flaw to be corrected, but a reality to be embraced. It is through that tension that we grow, that we discover the full range of our humanity. For only when we risk losing ourselves can we truly find ourselves. And perhaps that is what Nietzsche wanted us to understand all along, that love in its purest form is an act of courage. It demands that we face the unknown in another person and in ourselves. It demands that we let go of our need to win, our need to control, our need to be certain. It asks us to stand at the edge of the abyss, hand in hand, and to say yes. And so, in the shadow of his own brilliance and his own heartbreak, Nietzsche leaves us with a vision of love that is as terrifying as it is beautiful. He forces us to confront the fact that love is never safe, never easy, and never entirely under our control. It is a storm that can lift us to unimaginable heights or sweep us into ruin. To enter it willingly requires a strength of spirit that few possess, and yet it is the only way to live fully. Nietzsche understood that love's power lies in its unpredictability. We enter relationships seeking comfort, seeking validation, seeking a sense of permanence, and yet the very essence of love is impermanence. It cannot be owned, predicted, or commanded. It will always defy our expectations, challenge our pride, and demand that we adapt or be broken by it. That is why he calls it both brutal and divine. It is brutal because it exposes our vulnerability. It is divine because it reveals our capacity for courage, for creation, for transformation. Consider the lovers who have faced this truth and still persist. They argue, they misunderstand, they hurt one another, but they continue because they recognize that the friction between them is the forge in which their souls are tempered. Nietzsche believed that love's trials are not obstacles to happiness. They are the medium through which our highest selves emerge. To embrace love fully is to embrace life fully, in all its chaos, its beauty and its suffering. In this light, Nietzsche's warning becomes less a deterrent and more a call to bravery. To love, he seems to say, is to face the unknown with open eyes, to accept the risk of annihilation, and in doing so to discover a power far greater than domination, the power to transform, to create, to endure. The man who loves without controlling, the woman who loves without bending, these are the true alchemists of human experience. In their hands, love becomes not a cage but a conduit for the divine, a way to channel desire into meaning, longing into art, chaos into beauty. And yet, even as Nietzsche elevates love to this realm of transformation, he does not romanticize it. He does not offer illusions of eternal bliss or effortless harmony. Love, in his view, is a test, a crucible, and sometimes a battlefield. It demands self-knowledge, resilience, and the courage to stand naked before another human being, to let them see your flaws, your fears, your desires, and to see theirs in return. Only in that mutual exposure can love become a force for creation rather than destruction. Perhaps this is why Nietzsche's own life was so intertwined with tragedy. He loved intensely, demanded intensely, and suffered intensely. Lou Salome, the woman who eluded his grasp, was not merely a romantic disappointment. She was a symbol of the freedom he could not possess, the independence he revered, and the challenge he could not fully meet. In her refusal, he glimpsed the paradox at the heart of love, that its greatest beauty often comes in forms that cannot be held, tamed, or claimed. From that paradox, Nietzsche distilled a philosophy that is as relevant now as it was in his time. We live in a world obsessed with control over time, over outcomes, over people. Nietzsche reminds us that love defies control. Its power lies precisely in its freedom, its unpredictability, its refusal to conform to our expectations. To love truly and fully is to surrender not to another person but to life itself, with all its uncertainty and its intensity. And in that surrender lies the ultimate lesson, that love, far from being a weakness, is the greatest expression of strength. It is the strength to face loss without retreat, to embrace vulnerability without shame, to engage with the world fully, and to create meaning in the face of chaos. Nietzsche's brutal truth about love and power is ultimately a revelation of human potential, that by daring to love without illusions, we access a power that transcends possession, domination, and fear. In this, Nietzsche does not leave us hopeless. He leaves us challenged. He leaves us inspired. He leaves us with the knowledge that love, in its rawest, most honest form, is a mirror to our own greatness. It is both crucible and canvas, proving that to love is to live dangerously, courageously, and magnificently. And perhaps in the final analysis, Nietzsche's life itself becomes a testament to his philosophy, a man who loved fiercely, suffered deeply, and left the world a map of the possibilities and perils of human connection. He shows us that love is not a refuge from power, but a confrontation with it, and that in that confrontation we may discover the full range of what it means to be alive. Even now, Nietzsche's voice echoes across time, urging us to reconsider the very foundations of our relationships. He reminds us that love is never a passive experience. It is an act of courage, a deliberate engagement with the other's existence, a choice to enter a space where safety is uncertain and outcome is unknown. In our modern age, we are conditioned to equate love with comfort, with ease, with predictability. Nietzsche refuses this illusion. For him, love is most alive when it is dangerous, when it shakes the foundations of our self-deceptions, when it forces us to reckon with our own desires and limitations. He understood that power in love is not about domination, but about recognition, seeing the other as a full independent being, and daring to interact with them without trying to flatten their complexity into something manageable. That is why Nietzsche's ideas remain so piercingly relevant. Love is not a transaction, not a guarantee of happiness, not a shield against solitude. Love is a mirror in which we glimpse the infinite spectrum of our own capacities, the capacity for joy, for suffering, for creation, and for growth. Consider how he viewed the dynamics between men and women. Nietzsche recognized a natural tension, an interplay of energies, where each challenges and awakens the other. He did not prescribe roles or demand subservience. He described an intricate dance of influence and attraction, a continuous negotiation of wills where each is tested and refined. In this light, what we often misread as cruelty in his writings is in fact his insistence on honesty and clarity. He refused to romanticize the dance. He insisted we acknowledge its power, its danger, and its beauty. To love, in Nietzsche's terms, is to confront the inevitability of loss. He knew that the one you cherish will change, that your own desires will shift, that circumstances may sever even the deepest connection. But it is precisely because love is impermanent, because it is unpredictable, that it can become transformative. He believed that the true measure of love is not in possession, but in the willingness to engage with the other's freedom, to let them be themselves fully, even if that freedom pulls them away from you. This philosophy demands a terrifying honesty. It requires the courage to acknowledge that desire often masks control, that intimacy can conceal fear, that affection can sometimes be an attempt to manipulate rather than celebrate. Nietzsche's vision of love strips away the comforting illusions and asks us to meet the other without armor. It is love as confrontation, love as a crucible, love as a test of our own resilience and generosity, and yet it is not devoid of beauty. Far from it. Nietzsche believed that when two forces meet in this pure, unflinching way, they have the potential to create something extraordinary, a spark of truth, a flash of insight, a moment of shared transcendence. In such love, we see the essence of human greatness, not the safe, the polite, the conventional, but the brave, the wild, the fully alive. Nietzsche's own life was a testament to this vision. He loved intensely, often alone, often misunderstood. He experienced the agony of unfulfilled desire, the torment of rejection, and the isolation of genius. Yet even in his solitude, he celebrated life's intensity, and through his writings, he invites us to do the same. To embrace love with eyes wide open is to embrace life with the same courage, to risk pain, to endure uncertainty, to confront the raw reality of human connection. He understood that most people cannot love this way. It is too demanding, too consuming, too wild. But for those who dare, Nietzsche promises a form of love that transforms rather than comforts, challenges rather than placates, illuminates rather than obscures. It is a love that reflects the fullness of life itself, its joys, its sorrows, its power, and its tenderness. And so Nietzsche's brutal truth about love and power is revealed not as a warning, but as an invitation to enter love consciously, to navigate its perils and possibilities with courage, to recognize that the struggle is not the enemy, but the essence of its beauty. To love fully and freely is to participate in the most profound act of human creation, to dance with another soul across the shifting tides of existence, and to emerge perhaps bruised, perhaps scarred, but infinitely more alive. This is the legacy he leaves us, that love, like power, is not to be tamed or possessed, but to be understood, respected, and embraced for its transformative potential. To live as Nietzsche asks is to embrace love, not as comfort, not as guarantee, not as shelter, but as a force that tests us, molds us, and ultimately elevates us into the fullness of our own becoming. And as we continue to peer into Nietzsche's vision, it becomes clear that his philosophy of love is inseparable from his philosophy of life itself. He asks us not to seek security in the warmth of affection, but to seek intensity, to stand willingly in the fire that love ignites. For him, love is not a reprieve from suffering. It is the instrument through which suffering is transformed into insight, pain into growth, and desire into creation. It is not a cradle, but a forge. He once suggested that the most profound connections are forged not through comfort, but through shared confrontation with life's chaos. A couple who faces the world together, yet never diminishes the other's freedom, embodies this principle. They do not cling to each other out of fear or dependency. They hold each other as equals in the storm, willing to be challenged, to be awakened, to be reshaped. In this crucible, Nietzsche saw the potential for greatness, the cultivation of character, the awakening of the spirit, the birth of something that transcends the ordinary patterns of human attachment. It is precisely this awareness of love's peril and potential that makes Nietzsche so relevant to the modern experience. We are conditioned to romanticize stability, to fetishize emotional safety, to fear the turbulence that accompanies deep connection. Nietzsche turns this on its head. He insists that only by embracing the uncertainty and intensity of love can we glimpse its truest power. To love is not to possess, it is to risk, to create and to grow alongside another person whose force is equal to our own. Nietzsche's reflections also illuminate why love so often collapses in ordinary life. He understood that many enter relationships with unexamined motives: the desire to be comforted, the desire to be validated, the desire to escape solitude. When these motives dominate, love becomes a shadow of its potential, a transaction rather than a transformation. But when love is approached with awareness, courage, and honesty, it becomes the very arena in which human potential is realized. The trials of intimacy, the misunderstandings, the jealousy, the moments of doubt, are not obstacles to be avoided, but the raw materials of growth. Consider, too, the subtle interplay between love and power that Nietzsche emphasizes. Power is often misunderstood as dominance or control, but in his view it is the creative energy of life itself, the drive to shape, to influence, to bring something new into existence. In love, this energy manifests in both exhilarating and terrifying ways. The desire to be recognized, to be admired, to be cherished, is itself a form of power. So too is the capacity to respect the other's independence, to relinquish control, and to allow the beloved to flourish even when it challenges our own desires. Love in its most authentic form is a negotiation of these forces, a balance between assertion and surrender, between attraction and freedom. Nietzsche's own experiences make this painfully clear. He longed for Lou Salome not simply as a companion, but as an equal force in life, a mind and spirit capable of matching his intensity. When she refused, he was left to confront the raw, unfiltered truth that love cannot be commanded, cannot be possessed, cannot be forced into alignment with one's desires. It is a living force, independent, unpredictable, and often harsh. Yet even in rejection, even in the loneliness that followed, Nietzsche found meaning. The suffering itself became a teacher, revealing the contours of human passion, the risks of intimacy, and the transformative potential of desire. Through this lens, Nietzsche reframes the entire concept of romantic struggle. Arguments, disappointments, and heartbreaks are not failures. They are the testing ground for the human spirit. They demand that we confront our own limitations, wrestle with our impulses, and learn the delicate art of giving without losing ourselves. True love, he implies, is not comfortable. It is a crucible that forges strength, clarity, and depth. Ultimately, Nietzsche's brutal truth about love and power is a call to courage. To enter into intimacy with another human being is to risk annihilation and ecstasy in equal measure. It is to step into a space where neither safety nor certainty exists, and to say yes anyway. It is to recognize that desire is inseparable from risk, that passion is inseparable from pain, and that to truly connect with another is to confront the vast untamable forces that define us. And perhaps that is Nietzsche's final gift, a vision of love not as a refuge, but as an invitation to fully engage with life, to embrace it with eyes wide open, to navigate its perils with courage, and to allow its intensity to awaken the highest parts of ourselves. In this way, his philosophy transforms love from a sentimental fantasy into a living, breathing force, a force that demands honesty, strength, and above all the audacity to become more than we were before.